Hello. This is going to be about the behavioral approach to leadership. It's a fascinating topic. Talks about the behaviors that you need to engage in for you to be effective as leaders. But this is going to be a short video, not because this is not an important topic. It is, of course. And it is very practical too, because it tells you the specific things that you need to do in order to be effective as leaders. But in this video, I will share some of the initial research that took place from the behavioral perspective. Now, since the initial research, there has been a lot of research that has gone into this behavioral approach. And those research is usually clubbed into other theories. So generally, when we talk about the behavioral approach to leadership, we typically in the leadership literature refer to some of the initial research that had happened in the field. So that's the reason this is going to be a short video. So let's dive into it. As I have already mentioned, in the behavioral approach, the focus is on the behavior of leaders. What do they do? And what should they do for them to be effective in roles of leadership? So this is both a good descriptive as well as good prescriptive model of leadership. Historically speaking, this is an approach that developed in the 1950s. You would remember from the discussion that we had on the trait approach that the initial part of the 20th century, from the early 1900s to 1950s, the focus of leadership research was primarily on traits, and more specifically on the great men hypothesis. What are those traits that made these great men great, right? That was the kind of research question that researchers then were trying to explore. But by the time the researchers reached the 1940s, they had started getting disillusioned with that line of research. And by the time we reached the 1950s, many of those researchers who were working on the trait line of research had actually given up that line of research. Because again, you would remember they weren't finding traits that are common to all these great leaders. So that was the time that alternative approaches to studying leadership developed. One we have already discussed, which is the skills approach. cont'd was one of the pioneers in talking about skills, about the importance of focusing on skills of leaders. Because unlike traits, skills are something that you can do about. You can develop those skills. But there was another approach that developed around the same time in the 1950s, and that was the behavior approach. And especially if we compare the behavioral approach to the skills approach, you still need time to develop skills. If you want to be a great swimmer, you can't become a great swimmer overnight. You have to practice for hours together for extended periods of time in order for you to be a competent swimmer, right? In contrast to the skills approach, when we are talking about the behavioral approach, we are talking about what are the behaviors that effective leaders engage in. If we can identify those behaviors and if we engage in those same behaviors, then we can be equally effective. Now, yes, some of those behaviors may require a little bit of learning, but we are not talking about developing any skills as such here. We are just talking about knowing what are the behaviors that leaders or effective leaders engage in, and then engaging in those exact same behaviors. So what is it that the researchers find out? They find that leaders, or rather effective leaders, essentially engage in these two broad types of leadership behaviors: task behaviors and relationship behaviors. The task behaviors are those behaviors that are focused on accomplishment of tasks or accomplishments of the goals of the organization or the goals of the group that the leader is leading. So all those behaviors associated with accomplishing those goals are referred to as task behaviors. Then the second category of behaviors is the relationship behaviors. These are behaviors that leaders engage in with the purpose of building a stronger relationship between the leader and the followers, so that there is a greater amount of trust, so that there is a greater amount of bonding, so that the followers are happy, satisfied. So these are the two broad categories of behaviors that effective leaders engage in. Now, I will give you a little bit of background about where this research happened and the significance of that information. There were two universities actually where this initial research on the behavioral perspective to leadership happened. One was the Ohio State University and the second one is Michigan University. Now the researchers at these two universities, they were working independently and they even employed very different research methodologies to identify the behaviors associated with effective leadership. And yet they find the same answers, which are those task behaviors and relationship focused behaviors. So this is a really interesting finding, because when two independent group of researchers using very different research methodology find the exact same answer, then we can have a very high amount of confidence in the results that they obtained, right? So in any case, at the Ohio State, they were using a questionnaire called the Leadership Behavior Description Questionnaire, LBTQ for short, and these were some of the industries from where they studied the behaviors of leaders, and ultimately they find these two sets of leadership behaviors. The task behaviors, they call them initiating structure, because these task focused behaviors, which is setting goals for your followers, giving them goals, assigning them work, giving them deadlines by which they can complete they have to complete their responsibilities, assigning who is supposed to do what, defining the job responsibility clearly so that people know what are they exactly responsible for, and then you evaluate them on those parameters, monitoring their work. All these would be part of the task focused behaviors. And the Ohio State researchers, they call these behaviors initiating structure, because these behaviors also provide a sense of structure to the followers, to the subordinates. Without these behaviors, they will not be sure about what they are supposed to do or how they will be evaluated. So we, of course, vary by this need, but we all have a need for structure. And the task focused behaviors from the leader's side help provide that structure for the followers. So that's the reason the researchers call these task focused behaviors initiating structure. And then for the relationship oriented behaviors, which is about developing that bond, that close relationship with the followers, that development of that trust, that liking, that respect, so that the followers are happy. These behaviors, the relationship oriented behaviors, they call them consideration behaviors, because you are being considerate towards your followers. You are not just about accomplishing tasks. You are also treating them as human beings. So you are also being considerate towards their needs. So that's the reason they call them consideration behaviors. So little bit of different terminology, but essentially meaning the same thing. Initiating structure essentially means task-focused behaviors, and consideration behaviors means relationship-oriented behaviors. And at University of Michigan, they call these behaviors employee orientation behaviors and production orientation behaviors. You can imagine why they call it production orientation, because at Michigan, a lot of the research was happening also in the auto industry. So where the goal that the leaders are trying to accomplish is higher production of those automobiles. In any case, so the task-focused behaviors that I have already mentioned, they are termed as production orientation behaviors in the Michigan studies, University of Michigan studies. And the relationship-focused behaviors are called employee orientation in the Michigan, University of Michigan studies. But, although different terminology is being used, we are essentially referring to those same set of behaviors, task-focused behaviors and relationship-focused behaviors. So if you want to be effective as a leader, you need to engage in a lot of these task-focused behaviors and relationship-focused behaviors. If you do that, you are likely to be going to be effective as a leader. So irrespective of whether we are referring to the Ohio State studies or Michigan University studies, we are ultimately talking about the same set of task and relationship-focused behaviors. And these are some examples of those behaviors. Task-focused behaviors would be setting goals for the group or for people, clarifying expectations, setting standards of performance, setting schedules, timelines by which those goals need to be accomplished, assigning tasks, and a whole host of similar behaviors that leaders would engage in, all focused on accomplishing the goals. And then we have the relationship-focused behaviors, which is about showing empathy, showing understanding. If somebody is sick, you show empathy, understanding. Maybe some difficulties going on in somebody's family. You are giving the person a little bit of time to recuperate, maybe, right? And not just during these negative or during these difficult times, but also in general, you are friendly, you are approachable, you allow them to voice their thoughts, like allow for participation, you nurture them, and you stay accessible to them. Whenever they need, you are accessible, you are ready to listen to them. So these are some examples of relationship-oriented behaviors. Then Blake and Newton, who were two consultants, they combined the research from these Ohio State and Michigan University studies and presented the information in form of a graph, in form of a neat graph, which they called as the managerial grid. Even in their model, the managerial grid model, they are still talking about the same task-focused and relationship-focused behaviors. Task-focused behaviors, they call them concern for production, and the relationship-focused behaviors, they call them concern for people, but nonetheless the same. But using the same idea, they prepare this, which is the managerial grid. On the x-axis, we have the concern for production. So if you are at level 1, that means you are not engaging in enough of those task-oriented behaviors. If you are at 9, you are engaging in a lot of those task-focused behaviors. So you are really concerned about production and you engage in all those task-focused behaviors. Similarly, on the y-axis, we have concern for people, which is the relationship-oriented behaviors. If you are at 1 there, you are not engaging in enough of those relationship-oriented behaviors. You are not caring much about the people working under you. And if you are at 9, then you are engaging in a lot of those relationship-oriented behaviors. Now this then leads to a form of matrix, right? Where we have these various combinations where you are, if we focus on this part of the graph, You are neither engaging in a lot of task-oriented behaviors, nor are you engaging in a lot of relationship-oriented behavior. So what is going to happen? You will not be effective as a leader. Blake and Newton call this impoverished management. This style of leading where as a leader you are not engaging in enough of those task behaviors or relationship behaviors, you will not be effective. Now, what about the other combinations? Task management. In here, you are engaging in a lot of task behaviors, but not in a lot of relationship oriented behaviors because you are at one level there, right? So very few or no relationship behaviors. This style, they call it task management. Now, this is not a very effective style either. It is effective only maybe from a short-term perspective. You probably will be accomplishing some goals, but will it be sustainable? People probably will be dissatisfied because you don't care for them. You are not engaging in enough of those relationship-oriented behaviors. So the achievement of those goals that you may accomplish through engaging in task-oriented behaviors may not be sustainable for a long period of time. People may start leaving, people may start complaining, and even there can be other problems that may develop in form of a higher amount of counterproductive work behaviors, people rebelling against you, and people falling sick, increased absenteeism, and whole host of other problems. So a high engagement in task behaviors, but not enough engagement in relationship-oriented behaviors is also problematic. What about this part of the graph, where you are engaging in a lot of people or relationship-oriented behavior, but not enough task behavior because you are at level 1 here? That is problematic as well. Why? Because, hey, people will be happy because you care for them, you are engaging in a relationship behavior, but you are not engaging in enough task-oriented behavior. So you will not accomplish any goals. You will not get anything done. And that is problematic because as a leader, you are responsible for the achievement of the goals of the organization or achievement of the goals of the group that you are leading. So that is the reason Blake and Newton call this the country club management. It's all fun, hunky-dory, but not good for the organization. In fact, even your subordinates may start losing respect for you, if you are only working towards pleasing them and not focusing on accomplishing the goals of the organization. So then what is the solution? The solution is that as a leader, you engage in the 9-9 pattern, which is what they call as team management. That word team may be a little bit confusing here. They're not exactly talking about teams, but what they call is team management is nothing but engaging in a lot of task-oriented behaviors as well as a lot of relationship-oriented behaviors. So you engage in high amounts of both these types of behaviors, and that would be the most effective approach to leading. Even if you are doing a little bit of task and little bit of people-oriented behavior, which is the middle of the road kind of management. So you are engaging in some amount of task at level 5 and some amount of people at level 5 here. Middle of the management, again, they say that that's not good either. You are just trying to make a compromise of the two best approaches, and it's not going to help you a lot. So if you want to be effective, you should be focused on this 9-9 part of the grid. High amounts of task behaviors as well as high amounts of relationship-oriented behaviors. So that's pretty much what the behavioral approach to leadership tells us. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but very insightful, and something that you can easily do. You can easily implement these suggestions in your professional lives, in your personal lives, wherever it is that you are leading. You engage in enough number of those task behaviors. That means do not ignore the goals and work towards accomplishing those goals, and at the same time also care for the people who are working for you. Engage in enough or in a high amounts of relationship oriented behaviors. That will create the proper balance that will ultimately help you be effective as a leader. So that's all there is for this video, and in the next video I will be talking about a different theory which will actually contradict some of the things that I shared in this video. But until we reach that video, I hope everything made clear sense, right? Whatever that I shared in this video. So we will stop it here then.